everyone, and welcome to our second interview on Book Talk. My name is Kathy Logan, and I will be interviewing author Gerald Everett Jones, author of the Evan Wycliffe Mysteries. The trilogy has won 5 awards, including an NYC Big Book Silver and Mystery for the sequel Preacher Fakes a Miracle, winning the top 2 awards in a competition in the same year. Let's begin and see what Gerald has to say about the first book, Preacher Finds a Corpse, and his life as a writer. All right. So first question I have for you is, how is small town clergyman preacher Evan Wycliffe? Did I say that correctly? Wycliffe?
Wycliffe, actually, and
Wycliffe.
it's after the Wycliffe Bible commentary, which is a thing that ministers and theologians would know about.
Oh, that's a very smart reference there. I like that.
Well, I dropped the E at the end, but that's that's a
I got you.
technicality.
Kind of do it. Make sure to differentiate it a little bit. But how is he an amateur sleuth, as you call him?
An amateur sleuth and it's a classic genre of mystery fiction, of course. But an amateur sleuth is a reluctant investigator, someone who not only is not trained in police work or investigative work or criminal law, but in his role as minister in this small town. And actually, when the series begins, he's just a guest preacher. He's not even ordained. But the thing is that the people in this town will come to him with problems that others have no interest in solving. And as a compassionate person, as a curious person, he gets involved. And in this first book in the series, Preacher Finds a Corpse, he finds his best friend dead in a cornfield. So, I mean, he's pulled into it, whether he likes it or not, because he really has trouble believing that his friend had any reason to kill himself. And yet it has all of the outward appearance of a suicide. And indeed, the sheriff's office wants to write it off. And, it looks like a suicide. If it looks like it, then that's what it is. And let's just move on. So that's what you'd call the engine of drama in that book.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. You said that he isn't ordained. So how did he get a reputation as a faith healer? And I guess how does he? I guess he sees that as an unjustified label. So how does he also cope with that?
Well, I mean, certainly there is a stigma to that label, and there certainly have been a lot of evangelists who have pursued that particular approach for profit and selfish reasons. And Evan, Evan's a young man, not that long out of, I guess he's pushing 30, but he had gone from the small town, from Appleton City in southern Missouri, a farm boy, but he had gone to MIT on scholarship. Well, actually, he'd first gone to Harvard Divinity School on scholarship because he thought he was going to be a minister. And he learned enough about Christian history that discouraged him. So then he flipped over to science, went to MIT, studied astrophysics, got no real satisfying answers there. And in the course of that, and this is explained in the book, he loses his fiance. And so he has really no direction at this point. So he goes home, what we would all do in those circumstances. And he's no really visible means of support. So he goes home to Appleton City. And the 2 things that he finds he can do is, number one, as we all have in the post-internet revolution, we've all become data drillers. And so he has those investigative skills. And so he gets part-time work for the local Ford dealership, chasing deadbeats. people who skipped on their loans. So,
Yeah.
these people don't realize that with, their phones in their pockets,
Yeah.
it ain't hard to find people these days. So that's number one. I mean, he's making part-time work that way. He's living in a rented trailer, hardly bigger than a closet. He has a rather humble existence.
Can't get more humble than that.
Right. Well, but then also because, again, he had trained at Harvard Divinity. He had the qualifications to be a minister. He is the guest preacher at a number of the local churches, including the Baptist church, where there is his mentor is the pastor, is an older African American man who is very much his father figure. His father's Evan's father's passed away, so this fellow is there for advice. The Morgan Freeman character, if you will, and so Evan's a guest preacher, and he's scraping by financially. So those are the two skills that he brings to Amateur Sleuth. Now, an amateur, one of the advantages of the Amateur Sleuth genre for an author like me is you really don't have to know much about police work. You don't have to study a manual on police procedure, because he's not following police procedure. He's simply following wherever the clues go, and he's trying to dig into it. So that's an advantage. And I think from the reader's standpoint also, police procedural is such a tired genre these days. Not that there aren't brilliant novels written that way, but it's here's a date in the very first shot, here's the dead body, what do we do about it? And indeed that's how I start off, but of course Evan's path, as readers will find, is as much emotional and, if you will, even to some extent spiritual in terms of looking into the motivations, the reasons, the karma, if you will, as to why. It's that question we all have. Why do bad things happen to good people? I mean, there was a very famous minister who actually wrote that book, but he wasn't the first to ask the question. And I think that's a question we wrestle with every day. Yeah. Why is there evil in the world? All you have to do, I mean, flip on the television. It's going to be in your face all day long. So we have to find ways. And it's interesting. I was reflecting on your service name, Books Goes Social, and I was thinking, what's more social than books? Storytelling has to be the world's second oldest profession, or maybe it's even the first oldest, because you hear the love story told around the fire, and then you go, have your intimate moments. But seriously, storytelling is the way we relate, the way as social animals we express our concerns, our pains, the way that we ask for help, forgiveness, resolution. Indeed, in mysteries, very often the characters will speak of closure, which I think is really a rather empty term, because I think it's just a synonym for revenge, and there's no way that revenge or vindictive behavior solves anything. It doesn't bring back the person who was murdered, if that's the story. But yes, we share what in the business world we call lessons learned that then become best practices. It's like, this is how we learn, and I would say that is the talent of the human species, is we are survivors. And the reason we're survivors is we can tell each other stories and experiences, and we can say, listen, I know that looks tempting, but don't try that, because I've been there, I've done that. And I had a podcast called Get Published Radio, And the host always introduced me as, here's Gerald Everett Jones. He has good advice because he's made all the mistakes himself.
I
And
mean,
indeed, I have.
that's how you know the advice is coming from a good place.
I was one of the very first self-publishers back when it was before ebooks were even available. They were in development at the time. Sony, I think, couldn't, they actually had the technology. They didn't know what to do with it. But I had been writing business and technical books for quite a long time. And I had a very high-powered agent for those books. But they were primarily, computer self-help books. One of my most successful nonfiction books was called How to Lie with Charts, which is still taught at the university level. But after I'd been at this for quite a long time, I said to my agent, I said, well, I'm getting kind of burned out on business books, and people don't really need computer manuals anymore. I'm just going to turn to fiction. Now, I had been writing, spec screenplays and stories and, forever, but, I hadn't had any real success with them. And he just said, have a nice life. He was not about to represent fiction. And so I formed my own small press imprint, and I've published now 13 novels under that imprint, and I've got won more than 20 awards, and of which the Preacher Evan Wycliffe series has won quite a few of those, including I don't know if you're familiar with the New York City Big Book Awards, but one of the things that's great about them is they accept not only indie publishers, but also mainstream publishers. And so I won both first and second.
Yeah, I actually saw that.
The two books that are behind me won first and second in the same year. And so I can say best in mystery in all in the entire industry. Because I was competing against, Random House, Penguin. So, I was very gratified by that. Now, that all those awards will just about get you a cup of coffee, but it is gratifying because somebody besides yourself said, this is worth picking up, and so that is one. I would say, if nothing else, it helps you take the next step and suck in the next breath as a writer, because there are mornings where, why am I doing this?
Yeah. It's more like, what's the point of this? But I actually, because I did see you won those awards, which was really cool. And I just wanted to ask you, why did you start writing in the first place? Was there any authors that maybe that you read when you were younger that maybe inspired you, or was there another driving force behind this desire to write? Because I know you said you at first would write business manuals or business books about computer manuals, then you switch to fiction. But before that, I mean, what really compelled you to write? So I'm just curious about that.
Well, I guess I'll trace it back to, I think it started in the fourth grade when I won a short story competition from the Kansas City Public Library. And my short story was, it was actually an essay, why most people like Tom Sawyer. Okay. And then in sixth grade, I won another short story competition. And this was, it was indeed, this was the era of mainframe computers that were just coming in. And my father in his job had actually had some training. And I think maybe I was dimly aware of computer technology, but my first short story was called The Mayor's Secretary. And it was about a mayor who was having trouble with, running his local government. And he hired a computer to be his secretary. And it really didn't work out, especially when the secretary, who was a robot, So they're really ahead of time, and AI. When he found his secretary stealing his cigars. Now, of course, there's a whole Freudian dimension to, a, a tween writing a story about somebody stealing cigars. But, but the thing was that my dad was trained as a scientist, also was a devout Baptist Sunday school teacher, and he really wanted me to be one or the other, a minister or a research scientist. And all through junior high school, I was very much headed in that direction, and I'd always excelled at science and math. And somehow along the way, I didn't win first prize at a science fair. And I won second prize. I won second prize, but here we are, competitions again. But also I was starting to read. I read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and I read John Updike's The Centaur, which is a father-son struggle. And here I was having this issue with my dad over, I don't think I really want to do what you want me to do. Okay.
Yeah.
So as I got into high school, I had just this brilliant English teacher my freshman year of high school, who he had been the head of the department. He was the head of the department, and he had been teaching seniors. But as he told it, his seniors were so unskilled, he felt he had to go and teach freshman classes. So I got the top teacher in the high schools, and this fellow was so brilliant, cheerful Charlie Ruggles. And one of his favorite things was, in class, he would start in and he says, I want to tell you about my favorite dessert, souffle au chocolat. And then he would describe how he would go to the Drake Hotel dining room, and it was a sumptuous restaurant, and you had to order it just when you sat down, because it took 2 hours to prepare. And he would describe how it had this crust on the outside, and then it was somewhat moist underneath that, and it was fudgy, and then it was creamy and liquid and warm on the inside, and the taste of chocolate. And he would go on and on. It's like, why is this guy wasting our time? This old fart talking about dessert. And
did it make you hungry when he talked about
desserts? he was not a slim fellow. Okay, this was not a health food lesson. Okay, but I began to realize, and it was only later I realized, the power of description. He like you said, he made us taste this thing that drove, and of course this was all his agenda. He was trying to engage us in storytelling, and wow, did that hook set.
Definitely hooked me in.
Yeah, in high school, then I did a lot more writing, and then also I will say, and this has really informed my education and my life, is I was head of the debate club. And I began to learn to argue both sides of an argument, because in debate club at that time, now I don't know whether I can't imagine, maybe at schools they don't do things this way because it would be so non-PC, woke, whatever, is they would give you the topic, which in those days was nuclear disarmament, was one. But the thing is, you wouldn't know until the day of the debate club contest, which you're facing off against some other school, just like a football match. Okay. You would not know until that morning which side you had to argue. So you had to research both sides of that question.
Okay. That's actually a really interesting way to do that.
Well, and I don't, as I say, I don't know whether debate competitions work that way these days. But you had to learn to understand the logic and the evidence on both sides. It was like legal training, and you had to be able to argue both sides with, certainly you could have passion, but you had to learn to detach yourself from your emotions, especially from how you might feel personally about the topic. Okay, because say a criminal defense attorney, okay, might know that their client or suspect that their client is guilty, but for that person to get a fair trial, you must argue their case with as much vehemence as you can muster. So that was a very early skill to learn. And I really feel as though that's something that really should be taught and emphasized more in our school system. Is yes, it's fun, and we got all fired up on social media, with anger and, resentment and vehemence and whatever, but you need to be able to jump over and consider where the other side is coming from. And if we could appreciate that more, I think we would have more dialogue. I mean, that's what we need. Again, it's storytelling, lessons learned. How do we get from here to there? Because the only way we can get from here to there is by consensus. And then, when I was in college, I was in something called the College of Letters, and it was actually patterned after the Oxford PPE program. Politics, philosophy, and economics at Oxford. Mine was literature, philosophy, and history, but we didn't have a subject major. I would be in these seminars in college, and we would debate both sides of whatever the issue was. I mean, Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. How can you have a main character who is so disgusting? How would a human act that way? What could possibly motivate them? And later in college, I got very much involved in acting. As I told you,
Yes.
I was a playboy of the Western world in summer stock classic Irish drama. And but anyhow, I one of the things I learned as an actor is, perhaps more than some others of us, actors come to understand that anybody is capable of anything. Okay, what would an actor might be asked to play a Nazi. Okay, well, if you just think, okay, well, this fellow's a lunatic, then that's not going to get you very far in terms of a convincing performance as to why this person did what they did. Okay, were they afraid of losing their job? I mean, because certainly that's a motivation with a lot of people who follow unworthy leaders. Is this person has power, and with a stroke they could eliminate my income, my family, the way I support my family. They could ruin my reputation. I could never work again. That might be one. Or might this be some kind of quasi-religious belief in some ethos that I've just come to believe as a follower, that, as a cult, if you will. And certainly, you don't have to look very far these days to find all kinds of cult behavior where people believe that things are fundamentally wrong in the world, that there's stuff that just needs to change, and it needs to change tomorrow. And so we have to use extraordinary measures to get there, because this leader has told us this is the way, the truth, and the life. And that's actually a paraphrase of Jesus, but he he was a leader too, and it was very much a cult. I was raised a Southern Baptist, so Evan is very, again, it doesn't take much imagination to realize from my story, Evan studied at Harvard Divinity, he went to MIT. Well, I didn't go to those places, but I did study theology. I was raised in Sunday school. I did pursue my science projects.
Yeah,
so
your stuff.
Well, I mean, you write what you know. You write what you know.
Yeah, and I actually want to ask you, so those lessons that you learned throughout your life, like about like how anyone can do anything, like anyone is like capable of doing these evil practices, or the fact that like you were kind of forced to look at both sides of a situation, are those lessons that and again, like I'm sorry if this includes spoilers for the book, but are those lessons that Evan has to learn through his journey of like trying to find out what happened with the murder of his friend? I was just curious if you've had those. Yeah.
Certainly it comes right down to why do bad things happen to good people?
Yeah.
And from a practical level, I have unscrupulous bankers and real estate investors as my bad guys, if you will. This is not people carrying semi-automatic weapons. Okay, that's not
Mm-hmm.
the engine of conflict here. Now, in the second book in the series, there's a bit more violence because it involved teen kidnapping. But and actually in the third book in the series, Preacher Raises the Dead, it gets into it's actually a medical thriller in some ways because it happens during COVID, and Evan actually becomes the full-time minister because his mentor retires, but also he has to deal with people who not only are hospitalized, and he has to, because you have to, there's visitation. That's what a preacher does. Okay, you gotta visit the sick, you've got to bury the dead. And so but also he ends up having to deal with a patient dear to him who's fallen into a coma.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the fact that the fact that patient comes out of the coma, spoiler alert, it's like, okay, well, he must be a faith healer.
Yeah.
All the doctors
He's
said,
awakened.
all the doctors said is gone. So, yeah, but I would say, in terms of lessons learned, there are specific motivations behind people's bad behavior. In the case of the bankers and the real estate people, simply greed. Okay, so we've greed and the willingness to be unscrupulous, the willingness um, to feel as though you're above the law, or that you can do things your own way because you're, and justifies the means. We're going to, in that part of the country, farming has become very challenging, especially for single family farms. I mean, it's almost, I mean, a single cornfield on 1 acre of corn, I believe these days, $20 a profit in a season. I mean, it's ridiculous because there's so much of that commodity product, and there's so many big corporations, in competition. And whereas an acre of strawberries, now good luck raising an acre of strawberries. Most of those you've got to grow them in hot houses, mainly to keep the pests away because they're very vulnerable to pests, and soaking them with pesticides probably is a bad thing because
Not the
strawberries,
tastiest.
strawberries absorb pesticides because their skin is so thin. So you really, now organic, if it really is organic, that's the way to go. But an acre of strawberries, $30,000 of profit.
Wow.
So soybeans, a better deal, okay, than corn. But farming in general, that part of the country used to be all farmland, and it was corn for cattle, and it was cattle driven to market, like the slaughterhouses were in Kansas City. Not so much anymore. And the new model for business development in that part of Missouri is Branson, which is in the very southern part of the state, and that is a tourist resort town, and that is patterned on Nashville, and it's on the lake, so it's water sports and casinos. And now, one of your questions, you asked me what are some of the the comps or the models. I didn't model this series on the TV series Ozark. It had appeared after I started writing the series, but Ozark is in the same setting. It is there on the Lake of the Ozarks. There are, casinos are very much in the picture. Life on the water, and so it's that environment and that small town. There's that small town mentality, if you will, the gossip engine that informs the intrigue, because if you're the sheriff of in that part of the world, as and that's one of Evan's close friends. Of course, they have coffee at the same cafe. Okay, they know everybody in town. Well, but the thing is, if you're the sheriff, you really can't pay too much attention to gossip. Okay, you can't act on every whim that you hear. Now,
especially small town gossip.
As the sheriff does, he can pass that on to Evan and say, if you find any real evidence, you'd better let me know, because I don't want an apple to fall from a tree in my county and not know about it. But you understand, my hands are tied. I can't spend the county money on an investigation where we've closed the books, and that's what happens in the first novel. So that's part of it. But again, if you're talking about why bad things happen to good people, why is there evil in the world, you come right down to, you're right at the fundamental theological question of, well, would we know good? Would we know joy? Would life have any interest if there weren't the opposites of those forces at work in a kind of dynamic? Okay.
Thank you for listening. Tune in to part 2 of my conversation with Gerald on Sunday.